On June 26, 1944, at the Hollandia Air Base in Dutch New Guinea, Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald glanced away from the incomplete checkers match. The individual at his screened entrance had just shared his identity, though it barely sank in at first. MacDonald remained absorbed in his contest against Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith, who handled operations for Satan's Angels. With a subdued assurance, the visitor restated his name, prompting MacDonald to halt. Charles Lindbergh, the renowned Charles Lindbergh, the nation's premier flyer, was right there in an improvised leisure area, far from the U.S., seeking clearance to explore P-38 combat tactics. Neither realized then that this disruption would reshape extended-range fighter missions across the Pacific. Over the following 6 weeks, the methods Lindbergh shared would boost the Lockheed P-38 Lightning's engagement reach by almost 400 miles, turning what aviators viewed as unattainable into everyday practice. The account of how this non-military advisor effectively doubled the span of America's top dual-engine pursuit plane goes beyond mere engineering. It chronicles overcoming bureaucratic opposition through undeniable proof, as aircrews came to rely on calculations rather than gut feelings, and how one expert's prowess in fuel optimization altered Pacific air combat dynamics. These range extension formulas emerged not from technical guides, but from the routine flights of aviators discovering that prior lessons on engine handling left key aspects unexplored. What seemed out of reach was on the verge of becoming commonplace, guided by a 42-year-old non-combatant who had only piloted a P-38 3 days prior. The journey leading to that screened doorway in Hollandia traced back 17 years to the skies above the Atlantic. From May 20 to 21, 1927, Charles Augustus Lindbergh forever altered flying history by soloing 3,600 miles from New York to Paris in 33.5 hours. The Ryan NYP aircraft, dubbed Spirit of St. Louis, hauled 450 gallons of gasoline in oversized reservoirs that obscured the forward view. Lindbergh charted his course via periscope and basic navigation, controlling fuel use with a meticulousness that struck other pilots of the time as overly cautious. He touched down at Le Bourget Field with 85 gallons left, securing a fuel efficiency that specialists deemed unfeasible for a Wright Whirlwind radial power plant. This exacting focus on fuel oversight solidified as Lindbergh's signature skill in aviation. During the 1930s, while performing reconnaissance hops for Pan American Airways over both oceans, he honed approaches that pushed distances well past factory estimates. He recognized that stated range stats reflected typical performance, not maximum potential. Each motor possessed an ideal zone of operation where thrust, consumption, and wear aligned ideally. Uncovering this zone demanded insight into the interplay of intake pressure, prop revolutions per minute, fuel-air ratios, and airspeed readings, knowledge that surpassed basic instruction. By 1944, Lindbergh stood as a global authority on endurance flying, yet his ties to the U.S. Armed Forces were strained by his earlier non-interventionist views. He had vigorously opposed U.S. entry into European disputes, spearheading the America First Committee and drawing ire from President Franklin Roosevelt. On April 29, 1941, following Roosevelt's public likening of him to pro-Confederate figure Clement Vallandigham from the Civil War era, Lindbergh stepped down from his Air Corps Reserve colonel role. After Pearl Harbor thrust the nation into conflict, Lindbergh sought to return to the Army Air Corps. Roosevelt made certain that Lindbergh would never don a U.S. military uniform for the duration of the war. Still, such knowledge persists. Barred from active duty, Lindbergh took on a civilian role as a specialist advisor for plane builders. In 1943, he aligned with United Aircraft Corporation, delving deeply into their Chance Vought unit, makers of the F-4U Corsair. He worked at Ford's Willow Run facility to resolve issues in B-24 Liberator assembly. He conducted risky high-elevation trials in P-47 Thunderbolts to evaluate motor capabilities. He aided in crafting dive-bombing strategies for the Corsair. His input proved vital across these areas, yet Lindbergh yearned for frontline action. In the opening months of 1944, an opening arose. United Aircraft aimed to assess a fresh dual-engine interceptor. The sole U.S. entry in that class was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Lindbergh persuaded United Aircraft to dispatch him to the Pacific as an observer for P-38 combat evaluations. On April 3, 1944, Lindbergh readied himself for the South Pacific assignment. He stopped at Brooks Brothers in New York to acquire an unmarked naval officer's attire. At Brentano's bookstore, he picked up a compact New Testament volume. He was jotting down thoughts in his diary that afternoon. Given that I could only tote a single volume, and a compact one at that, it's the pick I'd make. A decade earlier, it might not have ranked so highly, yet as my knowledge deepens and my reading expands, fewer rivals emerge. Departing from San Diego on April 24th, he was formally en route to Marine Corps air facilities in the South Pacific region near Guadalcanal. The Navy Department greenlit the journey, though it remained hidden from the White House. President Roosevelt himself, along with Navy Secretary Frank Knox, had no inkling that Lindbergh was venturing into the combat area. What started as a mere scouting role evolved further after Marine aviators urged him to join as an observer on actual battle flights. On May 21, 1944, Lindbergh undertook his initial combat sortie, a low-level attack alongside Marine Fighting Squadron 222, close to the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. The Marines labeled it reconnaissance. Lindbergh, however, flew with armaments armed, firing at foes whenever chances arose. He soon displayed hands-on skills, surpassing mere classroom knowledge. Collaborating with Corsair flyers, he instructed them on launching safely while carrying bomb weights twice the F-4U's official limit. Previously, the Marines had suffered plane losses from overload mishaps. Through Lindbergh's meticulous review of engine outputs, launch velocities, and load balancing, such incidents dropped sharply, even as raid effectiveness rose. News circulated across the Pacific front that the renowned flyer was participating in fights as a non-military expert, tackling issues that had baffled service aviators for months. By the middle of June 1944, Lindbergh developed a fascination with the P-38 Lightning. United Aircraft truly valued twin-engine interceptors, yet Lindbergh had also caught wind that the 475th Fighter Group, known as Satan's Angels, stood out as one of the sharpest Lightning teams in the Pacific. To gain insights into the P-38, that unit was the ideal destination. On June 15, 1944, Lindbergh caught a ride to Finschhafen, New Guinea. He made his arrival known at 5th Air Force Command in Nadzab, where Colonel Marion Cooper shared a meal with him. That Sunday night, June 18th, Lindbergh ate with General Ennis Whitehead, chatting about New Guinea updates and his intentions to monitor P-38 activities. The permission was casual, unrecorded, and lax by rigid Army protocols. Still, in the adaptable hierarchy of the Southwest Pacific Command, informal ties and proven ability often outweighed formal documents. On June 20th, Lindbergh logged an hour and 20 minutes familiarizing himself with a P-38 alongside the 35th Squadron of the 8th Fighter Group. It marked his debut in the signature twin-tailed pursuit plane. On June 26th, he traveled to Hollandia and interrupted Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald's ongoing checkers match. At 29, MacDonald was already a 10-kill ace. He led the 475th Fighter Group, formed in Australia on May 14, 1943, and now one of the top-scoring P-38 outfits in the area. Its trio of squadrons, the 431st, 432nd, and 433rd, operated the newest P-38J variants featuring enhanced cooling systems and extra fuel tanks. These Lightnings boasted the farthest reach among Pacific fighters, enabling sorties impossible for others. Even so, with auxiliary tanks, the P-38's effective range stayed constrained. Strikes against far-off objectives drained reserves, forcing pilots back with perilously slim margins. A few planes had vanished when storms demanded unplanned routes beyond their endurance. MacDonald first brushed off Lindbergh courteously, resuming his game. But upon hearing that General Hutchinson, head of the 3rd Air Task Force, had dispatched him to explore P-38 tactics, MacDonald tuned in. Following a short exchange, MacDonald invited Lindbergh to join a sortie the following day. Lindbergh accepted. The operation was set for first light. Instead of heading back to base, MacDonald proposed Lindbergh bunk at the 475th site to sidestep travel hassles. As Lindbergh claimed the extra bunk, buzz raced through the outfit. Charles Lindbergh was teaming up with Satan's Angels. Pilots' responses varied. Lieutenant John Purcell from the 493rd Squadron anticipated encountering the Icon. Doubters abounded, though. A few wondered if a 42-year-old outsider, celebrity or otherwise, could cope with contemporary warfare. Major Thomas McGuire, a 15-victory ace destined to end the conflict as America's runner-up in kills with 38 verified, was eager to gauge the veteran's prowess. Come the dawn of June 27, 1944, Lindbergh readied for his debut P-38 battle run. Skies were grim, with steady drizzle at 0530. By 10:30, as the formation finally lifted off, the forecast had cleared. McDonald guided 4 planes toward Biak Island and Mockmer Airfield, staple objectives for the 475th. Lindbergh served as Blue 3, tucked on McGuire's flank. The remaining plane was flown by Merrill Smith, who was already an ace with 8 victories to his name. Lindbergh aligned seamlessly with the formation on McGuire's wing, as observed by McDonald. Remarkably, for a pilot who had just qualified in the P-38 mere days prior, his positioning in the flight group was impeccable. Their assignment entailed attacking an adversary's barge in Kibos Bay via strafing runs. Dodging bursts of flak, Lindbergh maneuvered adeptly, unleashing his cannons and machine guns on the objective. The operation succeeded without incident, and every one of the 4 planes made it back intact. Yet, the observation made by the maintenance teams upon touchdown carried far greater weight than the skirmish itself. Following multiple sorties, when technicians inspected Lindbergh's P-38, a clear trend emerged. His plane invariably came home, bearing a far larger fuel surplus compared to those piloted by others on matching routes. After a 6.5-hour armed recon flight on July 1st, targeting faux airstrips along the west side of Gilvink Bay, he touched down with 210 gallons still in the tanks. In contrast, his fellow aviators from that same outing arrived with nearly depleted reserves. On July 3rd, the squadron provided cover for 16 B-25s bombing Jeffman Island. Post-strike, the Lightnings shifted to pursuing barges. Soon after, 2 crew members signaled low fuel and headed back. Lindbergh pressed on, his gauges indicating ample margins. Spotting this anomaly, McDonald convened a briefing. Just 2 days following Lindbergh's integration into the unit, the colonel assembled the 475th's flyers in their makeshift lounge. The space was basic: earthen floors under a thatched palm ceiling, a single ping-pong setup, and a few card decks as the sole amenities. Bathed in harsh, bare-bulb illumination, McDonald dove right in. He presented Lindbergh officially and urged him to detail his method for conserving fuel better than anyone else in the outfit. The ensuing discussion would revolutionize P-38 tactics across the Pacific campaign. Addressing the gathered airmen, Lindbergh outlined the efficient cruising methods he'd refined for the Lightning. Conventional doctrine for all P-38 operators prescribed 2,200 to 2,400 RPM with the mixture on auto-rich, a setup that delivered solid performance and engine safety but at high cost in fuel. Lindbergh demonstrated that dropping RPM to 1,600, switching the mixture to auto-lean instead of auto-rich, and boosting manifold pressure modestly to offset the reduced speed would slash usage sharply while sustaining viable cruising velocity. His advised parameters: 1,600 RPM at 30 inches of mercury manifold pressure, auto-lean mixture, and 185 mph indicated airspeed. This approach cut fuel burn to roughly 70 gallons per hour, yielding about 2.6 miles per gallon. Against the baseline that guzzled far more, the efficiency gains were substantial. Lindbergh forecasted it would extend the Lightning's range by 400 miles, facilitating missions up to 9 hours. When he wrapped up his talk after 30 minutes, a hush settled over the group. The aviators grappled with a host of uneasy realizations. The prospect of 9-hour hauls didn't appeal to those already strained by 7-hour grinds. The P-38's enclosure was tight, flyers perched atop their chutes with a dinghy and oar pack underneath. Their exposure gear chafed. Enduring 7 hours their tested physical limits, 9 felt impossible. Even more disconcerting was Lindbergh's push to employ engine configs they'd been drilled to steer clear of. Pairing low RPM with elevated manifold pressure was dubbed over-square. Instruction manuals hammered home that such over-square running invited harm. detonation, sparking cylinder, head overheating, and potential total power plant meltdown. Trainees learned that surpassing RPM by more than a couple of inches in manifold pressure could wreck the motors. Here was an outsider advocating everyday use of what they'd been cautioned against as hazardous. Doubt hung heavy in the air. A few exchanged skeptical looks. Others shook their heads dismissively. One even labeled the approach outright risky. But McDonald grasped a key truth. Lindbergh drew from real-world experience, not just ideas. He'd logged combat hours with these tweaks. No mechanical issues ensued, and his craft repeatedly returned with buffers that afforded tactical edge denied to peers. The leader opted for empirical validation. Success meant a game-changing boost for the 475th. Failure would reveal itself fast. In the ensuing days, aviators started tentatively applying Lindbergh's protocols. Early tests were brief, ensuring swift returns if trouble arose with the power plants. The initial testers shared their anxious updates. Their engines seemed. The sound from the Allison V1710 engines shifted noticeably at reduced RPMs. That profound growl altered its tone, yet the temperature readings held steady. Oil pressure levels remained safely within limits. Crucially, the cylinder head temps, which signal any detonation risks, actually dropped lower compared to higher RPM operations. With growing assurance, aviators started applying Lindbergh's methods on extended sorties. The fuel efficiencies were impossible to dispute. Sorties that once demanded a prompt turnaround post-strike could now incorporate prolonged air cover duties. Trips where pilots had to watch fuel gauges obsessively now wrapped up with ample margins. The P-38's practical combat reach, once around 570 miles, stretched to 700 miles and later 750 miles. Airmen found they could access objectives previously deemed out of the Lightning's grasp, engage for 15 minutes above the zone, and still get back with a full hour's worth of fuel to spare. This shift marked a game-changer. Doubts faded away as successive operations validated the approach's value. Lindbergh joined the 475th routinely, racking up combat time and instructing through his actions. He guided formations, showing that the non-military expert could manage battle conditions just like seasoned service flyers. During his lead outings, his radio tag was straightforward: Mr. Lindbergh. He broke down the science of the method in clear terms, aiding pilots in grasping its mechanics. Plane motors generate thrust by igniting fuel to build force that pushes the pistons. Fuel use hinges on how much burns over a given period. The aim: optimize output, yielding maximum thrust from minimal fuel. Conventional high RPM cruising delivered ample thrust but squandered fuel via fast piston strokes that consumed excess unnecessarily. Dropping RPM while boosting manifold pressure allowed equivalent thrust through slower cycles, each one combusting fuel more effectively. The lean mixture adjustment enhanced this by supplying precisely the fuel needed for full burn, avoiding the surplus in auto-rich mode that's meant for cooling during peak outputs. Detonation didn't occur since, despite the over-square power ratio, it wasn't true high-output running. A 30-inch manifold pressure qualified as moderate, far short of the 60-inch emergency peaks for departures and fights. Slower RPMs, in fact, eased wear on mechanical parts. The approach posed no real hazard, it just diverged from standard training. Lindbergh's know-how stemmed from decades in extended flights. His 1927 transatlantic hop had shown him that factory specs served as baselines, not ceilings. His 1930s efforts with Pan American Airways, mapping Pacific and Atlantic paths, provided countless hours to refine fuel strategies. The P-38 offered a safety net that tempered the trial's perils. Dual power plants. Should one falter from the test cruising, the twin could ferry the flyer back. Across the expansive Pacific, where breakdowns often led to watery graves or enemy hands, solo engine pilots stuck to safe margins. Yet the P-38's backup allowed bolder boundary pushing, and Lindbergh recognized the logistics made it viable. Allison supplied plenty of V1710 spares and components to the theater. Post-trial overhauls meant crews could swap in new units swiftly if required. The range gains outweighed any minor uptick in engine strain. History bore this out. 0 P-38 motors gave out from Lindbergh's protocols. Come late July 1944, his cruising tactics rippled across 5th Air Force's P-38 outfits. The 475th's triumphs stood out starkly. Buzz reached other wings. Flyers chatted it up. Mechanics pored over fuel logs. Rival leaders craved the edge Satan's angels wielded. Lindbergh hosted more briefings for external groups. He detailed the system methodically, fielding queries on tech details and easing worries over motor integrity. Uptake wasn't instant or total, but it built reliably. Then, July 28, 1944, delivered Lindbergh's standout episode with the 475th. It involved shielding bombers headed to the Sorong region alongside the 433rd Squadron. Lindbergh served as Blue 3 in a quartet formation crossing Biak Strait. Blue Element spotted foes. A pair of Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonas, Japanese scout and strike bombers scouting for a lost ally, were heading back. These Sonas hailed from the 73rd Independent Chutai. One was commanded by their CO, Captain Saburo Shimada, the other by Sergeant Yokogi. The U.S. planes pounced. The Sonas were outmatched and sluggish. The Japanese Sonyas lagged behind the nimble Lightning fighters in speed, agility, and firepower. They ought to have fallen swiftly, yet Captain Shimada, a seasoned aviator determined to survive, refused to go down without a struggle. What began as a straightforward skirmish evolved into a prolonged chase across the skies. P-38s from the 9th Fighter Squadron had already spotted the Sonyas and joined the fray by the time McDonald's group arrived on scene. Shimada's wingman, Sergeant Yokogi, took a direct hit from cannon rounds unleashed by Lieutenant Wade Lewis, igniting flames along the Sonya's left wing. As the damaged plane veered straight to escape, Lieutenant J.C. Haslip maneuvered into position astern and unleashed a sustained volley. The crippled aircraft belched smoke and plummeted toward the waves below. Undeterred, Shimada pressed on with the battle. Over the next half hour, the Japanese leader deftly evaded a swarm of pursuing P-38s. He wrenched his plane into sharp, aggressive rolls, vapor trails whipping from the wingtips during his tightest maneuvers. American pilots struggled to anticipate his path and line up shots, their sights slipping away repeatedly. The ponderous Sonya could carve tighter arcs than the swift U.S. fighters, slipping inside their turns. Captain Danforth Miller, flying as McDonald's partner, momentarily locked onto the target through his sight, only to lose it amid Shimada's abrupt pivot to the left. Miller's rounds streaked harmlessly 80 feet short. Suddenly, Shimada pulled a bold reversal. Instead of dodging further, he aimed straight at the oncoming Lindbergh. The pair hurtled toward collision at a blistering convergence of almost 500 mph. For Lindbergh, whose vast flying experience had never included a foe bent on his destruction, the instant sharpened into stark horror. Shimada stayed true to his trajectory. Intentional ram or desperate shootout, the captain locked in on the deadly path. Lindbergh's reflexes kicked in. He aligned his sights on the Sonya's radial engine and squeezed the trigger. The P-38's nose-mounted arsenal, a 20mm cannon flanked by 50-caliber machine guns, roared for 6 full seconds as he kept firing. Projectiles hammered the enemy's forward section. The Mitsubishi's prop visibly faltered. Flames and fumes billowed from the power plant, yet Shimada didn't waver. In the final instant, Lindbergh yanked back hard, his lightning clearing the wounded Sonya by mere feet overhead. Shimada's machine nosed into a plunging spiral. Additional P-38s added their fire. The Sonya kept descending, smoke streaming, until it smashed into the sea at full throttle. A massive plume of foam erupted on contact, rippling outward in widening rings across the surface before the ocean swallowed it whole. The waters returned to their prior calm. Captain Saburo Shimada and his observer perished in the crash. Upon returning to base, the squadron debated the victory attribution. Several airmen had landed strikes on the Sonya, McDonald, Miller, and Lindbergh among them, but Lindbergh's frontal barrage proved the decisive blow, crippling the prop and triggering the terminal drop. In private, the group concurred. Lindbergh claimed his sole combat kill. Officially, though, the 475th's logs omitted the triumph. As a non-military observer, his battlefield role was unconventional enough. Logging a confirmed downing risked scrutiny that could curtail his involvement. 3 days on, August 1st, Lindbergh came perilously close to death himself. The sortie targeted a sweep over the Palau Islands, where the formation tangled with Japanese Zeros. Amid the chaotic melee, Lindbergh locked into a spiraling duel with a Zero ace who almost claimed him. MacDonald's timely shout, break right," followed by his own dive into the fray, pulled Lindbergh from the brink. That brush with disaster prompted 5th Air Force Command to draw the line. Lindbergh had validated his methods in action. Across his Pacific tours, he'd logged roughly 50 combat flights, including around 25 in P-38s with the 475th. He'd downed a hostile plane. He'd escaped death by a hair. Now, it was imperative to ship him stateside before calamity struck for good. On August 12, 1944, Lindbergh departed Hollandia for the journey home. The 475th's aviators assembled to bid him farewell, their admiration for the non-combat advisor heartfelt and unfeigned. Beyond sharing range-boosting tactics, he'd shared their risks, their combats, proving his mettle where status and celebrity held no sway. Lindbergh's lean fuel innovations rippled across far more than just the 475th. By fall of 1944, P-38 squadrons across the theater adopted adapted versions of his lean cruise formulas. Though exact figures shifted by squadron and scenario, the core approach remained consistent. Reduced revs, boosted manifold pressure, and thinned fuel-air mix, all yielding vast endurance gains. The strategic shifts were game-changing. Distant objectives once beyond reach now lay within grasp. Enemy airstrips previously shielded from escort cover confronted P-38s with reserves ample enough to battle above the sights and return. Pilots could now make it back to base without incident. The boosted operational reach meant that fighter planes could accompany bombers on raids that were once conducted without protection or simply avoided altogether. Extended patrols by long-range fighters delved further into areas controlled by Japan. Squadrons equipped with P-38s in Dutch New Guinea quickly started covering 950 miles to strike objectives, engaging enemies for about 15 minutes and then heading back. These kinds of sorties had been out of reach prior to Lindbergh's methods turning into routine protocol. The enhancement in distance wasn't minor. During the latter part of 1944, the expanded fighting radius facilitated actions that aided MacArthur's push toward the Philippines. Landing strips beyond the limits of prior fighter capabilities turned into practical staging points. Assault strategies that depended on securing nearer air bases could move ahead at a quicker pace. The tactical benefits extended beyond mere distance. They translated into saved time. Efforts that might have dragged on for months wrapped up in mere weeks, thanks to fighters extending their protective reach more rapidly. Moreover, the approach preserved lives. Aviators who once limped home on fumes now carried extra fuel for unexpected issues. Detours caused by poor visibility no longer spelled doom for planes. Those taking hits during battles stood a better shot at limping back to safety. The added fuel buffer created a cushion that cut down on losses from operational mishaps rather than enemy action. This greater endurance shone brightest amid the Philippines campaign. As MacArthur's troops stormed Leyte in October 1944, P-38s launching from fields in New Guinea and Morotai delivered air support across spans that were unthinkable just months prior. Arriving at the objective with zero margin for error versus having a full hour's worth separated true mission success from a token appearance. Still, integrating these innovations sparked debate. Certain leaders balked at first, fretting over potential engine strain. A few aviators stayed doubtful, favoring their ingrained habits over input from an outsider. Ground crew chiefs voiced concerns about accelerated engine degradation. Yet the results spoke volumes. Squadrons applying Lindbergh's strategies saw no uptick in mechanical breakdowns. Records of fuel use indicated substantial gains. After-action logs detailed triumphs in flights that were previously unfeasible. Come late 1944, Lindbergh's efficient cruising protocol earned a place in official P-38 guidelines. An idea sparked by a non-military advisor evolved into core military teaching. The U.S. Army Air Forces issued refreshed performance tables for the P-38, incorporating Lindbergh's findings. Training guides for pilots got overhauled to emphasize optimal fuel lean settings. Lindbergh's overall involvement in the Pacific campaign paints a picture of an aviator fueled by layered drives. His earlier stance of staying out of foreign conflicts painted him as divisive. Remarks on German flying advancements drew charges of pro-Nazi leanings. His vocal resistance to U.S. involvement in the global conflict shattered ties with President Roosevelt. Once fighting erupted, Lindbergh became an outcast, even as one of the nation's top flyers. Away from the Beltway's intrigue in the Pacific Zone, however, he earned respect via engineering prowess. The Navy and Army aviators who shared missions with him sized him up by his aerial talent and bravery, not his views. Major Richard Bong, the top U.S. ace with 40 kills earned through stints at V Fighter Command HQ and assorted outfits in the region, shared with a United Press journalist that Lindbergh ranked among the sharpest pilots in the group. He'd have been bagging Japanese planes daily if General Kenny had greenlit it. Praise from a figure like Bong carried more weight than any official pardon. Lindbergh validated his worth in the arena that counted, the skies of war. Upon his stateside return in mid-August 1944, Lindbergh kept aiding the military's tech side. That October, he joined an inter-service Army-Navy session on fighter efficiency at Naval Air Station Patuxent River, Maryland. He test flew seized Japanese planes, offering analysis of rival strengths. He persisted in advising United Aircraft and fellow firms, resolving field issues from frontline use. The nuts and bolts of Lindbergh's feats highlight the scale of the upgrade. The P-38J Lightning boasted 410 gallons internally across standard tanks, 2 90-gallon mains, 2 60-gallon auxiliaries, and 2 55-gallon wing edge units, plus options for external disposables. Full load could top 1,000 gallons under normal cruise conditions of 2,200 RPM with auto-rich fueling. Usage rates differed by report, but far outpaced Lindbergh's approach. His method slashed it to roughly a total of 70 gallons per hour overall. The operational reach in combat expanded from roughly 570 miles to 750 miles, while retaining equivalent fuel reserves for fighting and backup, marking a 31% gain. On operations demanding peak distance, extra external tanks paired with efficient cruising methods enabled sorties lasting nearly 9 hours and spanning more than 1,000 miles. Such advancements revolutionized actions in the Pacific. The tactical leapfrogging of islands that defined General MacArthur's push across New Guinea toward the Philippines depended on dominating the skies at every phase. The extent of fighter capabilities dictated which atolls could be skipped and which needed full invasion to secure landing strips. Through boosting fighter endurance, Lindbergh's methods permitted more aggressive strategies. Sites that might have demanded expensive beach landings became skippable, as aircraft could strike from farther-flung outposts. Certain scholars have wrongly linked Lindbergh's endurance-boosting approaches to the April 1943 raid that downed Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's plane. That sortie, executed by P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron out of Guadalcanal, did test the Lightning's boundaries, yet Lindbergh played no role in it. He didn't reach the Pacific area until well over a year afterward. Lindbergh's real input lay in turning those ultra-long hauls into standard practice instead of rarities. The personal side of Lindbergh's feats warrants special attention. At 42, he headed to the Pacific. He took on enemy flyers 2 decades his junior in battle. The rigors of sanitary turns, the pressure of dogfights, the misery of 7 to 9 hour trips in a tight cabin all wore him down. Yet Lindbergh sought no privileges. He tackled identical assignments, confronted equal risks, and adhered to standard protocols like the young second lieutenants and majors forming the core of the 475th. His commitment to validating his ideas via hands-on flights proved essential for their adoption. Had he merely discussed fuel efficiency from a desk at base, aviators would have brushed him off as yet another armchair expert ignorant of frontline truths. Through leading by example in actual raids and repeatedly showing his methods succeeded, he gained trust that status or celebrity alone couldn't buy. Lindbergh's triumphs rippled further than just conserving fuel. He showed how non-military technical know-how could matter in warfare. Armed forces typically favor hierarchy and battlefield savvy, but intricate contemporary conflicts called for engineering depth often found beyond official ranks. Lindbergh illustrated that outsiders with niche skills could boost fighting prowess if allowed input. His results prompted commanders to heed advice from non-combat specialists at plane builders, power plant firms, and labs. This better synergy between service personnel and industry innovators sped up wartime tech progress. The P-38 Lightning merits praise, too, as the plane that facilitated Lindbergh's innovations. Its dual-motor setup offered the backup that eased testing. The Allison V-1710 power plants, despite frequent complaints about issues, handled precise fuel blending effectively. The P-38 setup, featuring various reservoirs and shifting mechanisms, let aviators distribute gasoline with precision. The plane's balance suited extended steady flights. By the end of 1944 and start of 1945, the P-38 yielded ground in certain regions to the P-51 Mustang, which excelled at altitude and stretched farther on equal fuel. Still, in the Pacific, the P-38 held its worth till the end. Its paired engines ensured reliability over oceans. Its potent guns unleashed fierce barrages. Its handling at lower and mid-level heights fit island skirmishes, and its span, particularly via Lindbergh's tactics, stayed outstanding. The end numbers paint the picture. The 475th Fighter Group, solely on P-38s, notched 551 air kills, topping all Lightning outfits of the conflict. The U.S.'s runner-up ace, Major Thomas Maguire with 38 triumphs, piloted P-38s in the 475th. The jet's blend of distance, punch, and dependability crowned it the premier interceptor there, with Lindbergh's reach extensions amplifying all P-38 functions. Sorties probed deeper, battled extended, and came home more securely. The overall effect across countless missions and vast accumulations of airtime proved profound, yet tangible. The tale also spotlights the tense interplay between specialists and establishments. Lindbergh's stances before the war had barred him from formal armed duty. President Roosevelt's private host hostility kept Lindbergh out of official military attire. Nevertheless, the Army Air Forces desperately required the specialized skills he offered. The workaround, an unofficial role as a civilian with tacit permission to join combat missions, was unconventional and would probably breach today's standards. Still, it succeeded. Bureaucratic stiffness yielded to practical battlefield needs. The outcome greatly advanced the Allied cause. Those who shared the skies with Lindbergh in 1944 carried his lessons with them forever. In later interviews, veterans from the 475th Fighter Group expressed admiration for the non-military expert who soared alongside them and showed them how to extend their flights beyond imagined limits. Colonel Warren Lewis, leader of the 492nd Squadron, could still recite Lindbergh's precise fuel conservation adjustments years afterward. Details shifted a bit across recollections, adapting to varying circumstances and plane types, yet the core idea held true everywhere, and the gains were irrefutable. Charles Augustus. Lindbergh passed away on August 26, 1974, at the age of 72, succumbing to lymphoma in his residence in Kipahulu, Maui. He had quietly departed from Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York on August 17, reaching Maui only a week prior to his passing. Roughly 3 hours after he died, he was laid to rest in a basic, handcrafted casket assembled by local Hawaiian ranch hands in everyday attire. His burial site, a 30-foot deep pit edged with lava stones and dark sand from the shore, lay in Palapala Ho'omau Church Cemetery. Just 15 individuals were present. The headstone consists of a plain concrete block inscribed with a verse from Psalm 139:9. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. His wartime diaries, released in 1970, offered in-depth records of his contributions in the Pacific, particularly his stint with the 475th. Lindbergh's influence in the Pacific went further than the particular methods he imparted. He illustrated enduring concepts. Skill in technical matters proves vital during fighting. Non-military experts can make real impacts when afforded a chance. Established protocols deserve scrutiny and refinement backed by solid proof. Hands-on examples outweigh theoretical debates. And above all, enhancement remains possible even in seemingly complete frameworks. Ultimately, Lindbergh's accomplishments in the Pacific highlight a rare blend of deep knowledge and urgent wartime demands. The Pacific Campaign called for fighters with exceptional reach. Standard practices curtailed distances short of the plane's true potential. Lindbergh brought irreplaceable insights into fuel optimization, honed over decades of efficiency pursuits. Circumstances allowed him to deploy this wisdom under real combat pressures where success metrics were clear-cut. He displayed bravery by testing his approaches firsthand, endangering himself to validate his ideas. Moreover, he collaborated with aviators on equal footing, forgoing any deference to his renown. The tale of Axis captives encountering U.S. manufacturing prowess illustrated a shift in mindset via sheer material dominance. Lindbergh's narrative reveals a shift in tactics through showcased proficiency. Each underscores how profound triumphs often stem not from raw power, but from targeted insight delivered and validated in action. Those German detainees went back enlightened about how free societies generate plenty. The U.S. pilots mentored by Lindbergh acquired skills that amplified their mission reach and ensured more safe returns. The P-38 Lightning pressed on through the conflict's close. Its signature twin-tail design stood as an emblem of U.S. aerial strength in the Pacific. Its operators held fond memories of the machine, quirks and hurdles notwithstanding, especially those who piloted it in 1944. They also recalled the outsider who instilled in them that the unattainable was simply challenging, that stated constraints were mere baselines rather than walls, and that insight could reveal powers lurking openly. Such is Lindbergh's enduring Pacific imprint, not the skirmishes won or sorties completed, but the wisdom disseminated and skills conveyed. He entered as a watcher and exited as an instructor. He showed up as a star and left as a peer. Through pure grasp of mechanics and bold proof of superior ways, he elevated a plane's performance. The aviators of Satan's angels grasped the gift Lindbergh bestowed. They ranged deeper, battled extended, and came back more securely thanks to expertise in fuel thrift freely passed on by a layman who outmatched all in the Pacific on that front. That insight, battle-tested and rolled out across the region, marked one of the Pacific Air Campaign's top technical breakthroughs. It sprang not from research labs or design bureaus, but from a single individual's refined command of a craft he had mastered 17 years previously across the Atlantic. That expertise, employed in a new setting with unfamiliar planes, demonstrated equal worth in 1944 as it did back in 1927. The core idea stayed unchanged, fully grasping the plane's capabilities, handling assets with accuracy, and refusing to treat official boundaries as absolute. Lindbergh embodied this idea, and during 6 weeks that summer in 1944, he shared it with top-tier fighter aviators in the Pacific. They, in response, passed it along to more pilots, disseminating insights that transformed the way the United States waged its aerial campaign in the Pacific.